Welcome to today's Awesome Marriage Podcast. I'm so glad you guys have joined us today. My special guest is Dana Che. She's a certified marriage and relationship coach, a speaker, and the host of the Real Relationships Talk podcast. She and Sean have been married for 24 years together. They have 4 children. We're going to talk about some tough marriage topics today. We're going to hear her story about how they overcame some really tough times in their marriage. We're going to talk about connection and conflict. We're going to talk unhealthy conflict patterns. What if your spouse is emotionally unavailable? A lot of really good things. I think you're going to love this interview. Dana shares so many good things that I think will make a difference for your marriage. So let's go to the studio right now. Well, Dana, welcome to the Awesome Marriage Podcast. Thank you for saying yes and meeting today. It's just been, we had got a chance to talk before we went live, and it's great to get to know you.
It's such a pleasure for me to be here with you today, Dr. Kim. Thanks so much for having me.
It's my pleasure, very much so. So let's kind of jump into marriage, and you have shared a lot about what your marriage has overcome. So share some of the marriage story with us so people can kind of see where you've been.
Yeah. Well, my husband and I have known each other almost all our lives. I met him when I was probably 4 or 5 years old. We were at the same church, and he's a couple of years older than me. He's actually the same age as my sister. So that was just kind of like my sister's friend. I wasn't interested in him growing up at all. Until we got to high school. We went to a small Christian school in our area, and everyone was like, you guys need to be together. So we started dating in high school. And I was a believer, as he was as well. And first year in college, we found out that I was pregnant. And that was such a shock to everyone, including me, because it wasn't, like I was in a backslidden state. I wasn't, promiscuous or anything like that. But I had this stronghold in my life that I didn't fully surrender to the Lord. And so we were like, wow, this is obviously a big change in plans. What are we going to do? We knew that we were going to get married eventually, but we were like, okay, after college for sure, and with the baby, that really just kind of accelerated our timeline. So we got married literally 30 days after I turned 18. I remember going down to the courthouse, and I was 17 years old when I applied for a marriage license. So we got married super young. And because we were kind of entering marriage, or not kind of, our son was 6 weeks old when we got married, because we had entered marriage with a newborn. And obviously at 18 and 21, you're not financially stable. So we kind of had all of these things stacked against us in the very beginning. Neither one of us were really walking with the Lord like we should have been. And so there were just such an array of problems from the onset of our marriage. I feel like we kind of started off at such a deficit. And so very quickly, we started having communication problems. We, were both working full time and still trying to go to school full time. So we weren't connecting. We weren't spending enough time together. Our walk with the Lord, like I said, wasn't good. And so that just began to open the door for a lot of really hard problems. We walked, and I'm very transparent about our walk with infidelity. That happened very early in our marriage. And it just seemed like anything in a marriage that could go wrong was going wrong in my marriage.
Yeah. This sounds like you just so much so quickly.
Right.
Like that. A couple of things I want to ask you. Just in that time, how did your family support you guys when they found out about the pregnancy and then your decision to marry? Did you have support of people that loved you?
We did. So thank God for my mom. My mom is a school teacher, and she's always worked in like inner city schools. And so I remember growing up, we kind of had like an unofficial crisis pregnancy center in our home. My mom would teach these girls, and in 6th grade, Dr. Kim, they were getting pregnant in 6th grade, and their parents would kick them out. They would come and live with us. This is, 30, 40 years ago. They would come and live with us and until their parents cooled down or, took them back or whatever. So I kind of grew up seeing teenage pregnancy a lot. Unfortunately, that is something that ran through, and I say ran in the past tense because we have broken that stronghold, but it ran in my bloodline. And so I always knew that if I got pregnant, God forbid, as a teenager, my mom wouldn't kick us out. She told us that growing up, my sisters and I will not kick you out. We believe we are a life-affirming family. We do not, believe abortion should be on the table. So I knew all of those things in my head, but when you're walking through that, it's hard. I didn't want to disappoint my mom. I didn't want to disappoint my church. I felt I was embarrassed. There was so much shame, I think, that I didn't reach out to the very people who could help in the beginning. And then just through the providence of God, I had a neighbor who, she was kind of like that fun neighbor who would like let us come over and like do things we weren't supposed to do at her house. And she had been very honest with me about she had several abortions. And so I thought, well, I'm going to call her because even though I'm I believe in, I'm pro-life, I'm life affirming. At that stage, I was considering abortion. And I thought, well, I'm going to call my neighbor because she'll kind of help me feel better about this. And this was a woman who did not know the Lord. And the Lord used her to speak to me. And she said, Dana, you do not want to do that. That was the worst decision that I have ever made in my life. And you will regret it for the rest of your life. And so it was through that phone call that I got the courage to call my mom and say, Mom, this is what's going on. And she loved us. She didn't, chastise us. She was like, okay, what's your plan? What are we going to do? And so thank God that we did have that support. My husband's parents weren't as accepting in the beginning because obviously it's a big shock. They don't want their son to be a teen dad. But eventually they came around and now we have really great relationships with both of our parents.
Sure. But it was tough. It had to be tough. At that time. It is so interesting when you hear stories like yours, how God can bring someone in your life that is not a believer that makes a difference. And how God can use so many different people. And the fact that that's the one you reached out to and that's the one who helped you make the right decision.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, you would think it would be like the church. And we went to a very traditional church and our church was our pastor or my husband's pastor. We had left at that time, but he basically said, either you get married or you break up. That's it. Those were our choices. And we were like, oh well, I guess we're going to get married, And so, and honestly, to this day, I don't know that was the best advice. I don't know that we should be encouraging 18-year-olds to get married. Now it worked out. Right. And I'm cautious when I tell, especially if I'm speaking to younger crowds. Yes, it worked out, but the struggle, the journey that we had to walk through was so difficult because we didn't do things God's way.
Sure. And you had a child from day one of your marriage.
Right.
So there's 3 of you to start with. So you didn't get this honeymoon time without, you're changing diapers. You're getting up in the middle of the night. You're doing all those things that you do when you have a baby, but you're doing it from day one. And that had to put a lot of strain.
For sure. It put strain on our friendship. It put strain on, again, how we connected. And then my husband, he's such a hard worker. So he was always working. So then there was that resentment, even though I knew that like he's working to provide for our family. But we literally we were 2 ships passing in the night. We never saw each other during the week. He would leave, and go to work as I was coming in or vice versa. And those were some really, really difficult years.
So let's kind of talk a little bit about what helped you most as you navigated through those tough times.
My friends, I had really great friends in my life at that point who were always supportive of me. My mom has been a huge source of strength for me. My mom is, she was my discipler. She was the woman who, from the time I was little, who would open the scriptures and really taught me how to read the word and how to love the word, how to apply the word of God to my life. So even those earlier years in our marriage when I wasn't really walking with the Lord, I say he was always walking with me. Like I knew that he was there. I just was so full of shame and all of that, that I really couldn't engage in that relationship with the Lord. But once I came back, like fully came back to the Lord, that, of course, changed everything.
Sure.
So even though my circumstances didn't change right away, I was changing. And I wasn't getting so bitter or, angry. I was learning how to forgive. I was learning how to be patient with my husband. I was learning how to be patient with myself, with my little toddler, because now we've got a toddler. And so, you throw all this marriage stuff and now you've got a very rambunctious toddler running around. Yes. And so God was changing me from the inside out. And so I attribute kind of what helped me get through that was, again, just good relationships with my mom, my friends. And then again, once I rededicated my life to the Lord, just a solid relationship with him.
Your mom sounds like an amazing woman.
Yeah, she is. I don't think I appreciate her as much as I should, but she really is.
She just the fact of how it was so interesting how she took care of women that were in your condition, and then now get to take care of my daughter in this situation.
Right.
That's amazing. So having people that supported you was really important. What about your husband? What helped him during that time, do you think?
My husband, I think, being a young man and trying to find himself, really trying to find what is my contribution to the world. Now I have this wife and this child. So my husband is a very easygoing, laid back guy. He was not very communicative with me. So I didn't know a lot of his struggles early on. Like, I just saw that he was working all the time and I never really saw him. So, he took a while to come back to the Lord. He struggled a lot in his life. And that was hard because as a wife, I knew that I couldn't change him, but that didn't keep me from trying,
Right. Exactly.
So I bumped my head up against the wall many times trying to change him. But, it's just, honestly, Dr. Kim, I could say it's just the grace of God that kept him and that kept us together. There's a time where I was like, I'm so done with this marriage that I'm going to get a divorce, but I couldn't afford a divorce. So guess what? We're going to have to work it out.
We have to work it out. It's interesting, the constraints that are there that kind of God can use to keep us in something.
Oh, yeah.
But I think you're a testimony of what, sometimes people will ask me, they'll be in a marriage, maybe they got married because they're pregnant or different circumstances that just weren't ideal. It's not the fairy tale, dating, everything. And I just tell them, I believe when you stand before God and take those vows, that God does everything we let him do, that we allow him to come in to do, to make this a great marriage. And I think you guys are a living testament to that.
Yes.
That God was there and you let him work in it, and that you did give your husband, even though you encouraged him a little bit, give him time to be where God wanted him to be.
Absolutely.
That in itself's a blessing.
Yeah. One of my favorite scriptures is Ecclesiastes 4, and it talks about that triple braided cord not being easily broken. And I often say, I had let go of my side of the rope. My husband had let go of his side of the rope, but God, ever faithful, never let go. And so it's not because we were so great and we did all of these things. It was literally the faithfulness of God that was like, I am not going to let you guys go. I know that this is hard. I know that this is tough. I know that you're weary, but I'm still holding my end of the rope. And I'm just so grateful, because if it were left to us, left up to us, there's no way that we'd still be married today.
No. So you talked about the one time where you felt like divorce. Was that something that you guys eventually decided we're taking this off the table, or how did that come where that wasn't? How did you take that option away?
My husband was never in favor of divorce. So he was never one who entertained those thoughts. He was always like, we can work it out. We can work it out. And I eventually got to the point where I said, Lord, you're either going to fix us or you're not. And I believe that you can. So I'm just going to put all of my faith eggs in that basket, if you will. I'm just going to throw all of my faith into the God, you're going to heal us. And that's what happened, So I don't know that I officially said to him, like, we're going to take divorce off the table, but it stopped coming out of my mouth. I stopped coming into agreement with it being an option. So when we would have struggles, I didn't think, okay, I can just divorce him. I thought, okay, we need to fix this. We need to work this out. There's a solution. I'm a big solution person. So I believe there's a solution to every problem. We just have to find it. And so it kind of became this like treasure hunt, if you will, sometimes to be like, okay, there's a solution here. What aren't we seeing? And then, going back to our faith and being like, Lord, you are the source of all wisdom. And we don't understand. We can't fix ourselves, but you can. So show us what we don't know. Show us what we're not seeing. And God has just been so faithful to do that.
Yeah, that's so good, because I think when that quit being an option for you, that really does change things at that point, because then you realize, okay, I'm stuck, so we got to figure this out, because you just don't want to live stuck for 50 years.
Right.
You want something to let God do something that's really good for both of you. And obviously, as you begin your family, that's really cool. So you talk about a couple turning conflict into connection. And I think the word conflict, some people don't even like to talk about it, because most of us don't know how to do conflict well. So how do we turn conflict into connection?
Yeah, it's one of my favorite things to talk about. I believe that conflict can be our teacher in so many ways. I think one is that conflict shows you about you. It shows you like, what are the things that you value? Because if someone is pressing up against my value, I'm going to get angry. I'm going to get upset. There's going to be a response from me.
Right.
And I might think, oh, it's because they're doing this thing. But when I sit back and I say, wait a minute, why am I getting so upset? Oh, it's because I really value this thing that this person doesn't seem to value. So I think that it helps you to understand about yourself, and then it connects you because it opens the door to those what I call deep water conversations. A lot of couples live very shallow marriages where they're talking about the kids, they're talking about who's going to pick up, dinner, they're talking about the bills, they're talking about things that are just kind of shallowy conversations. But when you actually engage in conflict, then you can start to learn more about your spouse. You can start to learn about what's important. Like I said, those values, those things that are really important to them. You can start to hear a little bit of their backstory, things that maybe you knew the story of how they grew up, but they'll tell you something. You're like, ooh, like I heard that differently. I didn't know that when your dad did that really affected you so deeply.
Yeah.
And when I said that triggered that thing in you. Like, so when you start to really listen to your spouse in conflict, it can connect you because it breeds compassion in you if you allow it to. And then you work together in this collaborative way to find a solution. So I think about many times financial conflict, that my husband and I have walked through where we'll have this big thing in front of us and we can allow that to come between us. Like, usually in marriage, there's a spender and the saver, right? And so I'm the saver, my husband's the spender. And for years, that would tear us apart until I realized it doesn't have to. We don't have to continue to have conflict about these two warring values. What we can do is we can collaborate. We can say, okay, you want to spend money here, but I want to save money here. So how can we work together in order basically for both of us to win here?
Sure.
And so it starts to become this opportunity for connection when you learn that through the conflict, you can actually work together and you can overcome things together. When you do that, then you realize your connection is deeper. Now those conversations that were scary at first, like, I don't want to engage, now they become an opportunity because you're like, wait a minute. Last time we had this conflict, something beautiful came out of it. So let's go into this one and see what we can create out of this conflict.
Yeah, you're building on the past success. So I have a question. So the ladies that are listening today are probably going, yes, yes, yes. And the guys are going, I have to talk deep. I have to do this. How did your husband get there? Because I think for most men, that doesn't come very easy.
Right. I think the biggest thing, we talk a lot about women who need safety. It's like our primary need. Men need safety too. And they need to know that, like, my husband has told me many times, like, if I tell you something, you can't bring that back up in a conversation. Like if a husband is vulnerable and he allows you to see that vulnerability, the worst thing that a wife can do is then weaponize that vulnerability in a later conversation. So I think that is a big thing. And then just encouraging him that I don't think men's vulnerability is going to look like ours. Like my husband's probably not going to sit on the edge of the bed and cry, but he might say, I feel like I'm just not measuring up. I feel like you're not really like happy with me. He might say something like that. Whereas my vulnerability or opening up might be me sitting and crying and telling him all the things that, So I think if we expect as wives, if we expect our husband to open up and be emotional in the same way that we are, we might be missing an opportunity for when they actually are opening up and sharing, but it doesn't look like we thought it's going to look. So then we discount that as them not being emotionally available to us.
That's so good, because I think that really, and then what you were saying about just when a guy finally is vulnerable to listen, like you said, and then to affirm that in him. Because I think we need that as guys, because it is scary. And guys come into counseling, they'll never talk about their feelings, ever. And when they finally are able to take that risk, take that step, and that they see that their wife embraces that and loves it and makes a difference, then they can get on that path. But it's hard for a lot of guys to do that, especially if someone was raised in, no, guys don't talk about their feelings and guys don't cry and don't do this, because if you don't, you're not a real man. And that's so damaging. That's so damaging. I always go, okay, well, Jesus cried. What are you going to do with that? I mean,
Right.
seriously. Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
And we have boys, we've got 3 boys and a daughter. And that was one of the things that was really important to us, is that our kids could emote freely. That it's not wimpy if you're a boy and you cry. Even when they were little, I remember a few times, all of our kids are athletes. And so they've broken, but they're just all hurt and banged up all the time, right?
Yeah.
And I remember once when one of our kids, I don't remember which kid it was, but they were younger. And my husband's kind of like, get up, you're fine, you're fine, you're fine. And they're like bawling tears, And so I had to tell him, I was like, let them cry. Like, it's okay. Now, I didn't say that in front of the kids, because I'm a big believer in, like, in front of your kids, you're one unit all the time, right?
Right.
And he was receptive to that, because he realized that even without trying, he's trying to basically say it's not a big deal. Come on, you can go outside and keep on playing. But what he didn't realize is that just being like, come on, you're fine, don't cry. That was teaching that kid, like, I need to shut off these emotions. Yeah. And as parents, I think we do things like that. Subconsciously, we're not intentionally trying to harden our kids. We're trying to make them ready for the real world, but we can actually cut off their emotional availability without even realizing that that's what we're doing.
That's so good. Absolutely. Because I don't, most parents don't really overtly say that, but it's how our actions and our other words that kind of give that message to our kids. Mm-hmm. And just to be aware of that. That's really good. So, what about a couple that wants to do the conflict and connection, but there's really some unhealthy conflict patterns in play? How do you get past that? Because like I said earlier, I don't think many people had conflict modeled well in the home they grew up in. Some do, but it seems to me, working with people all these years, it's rare. And so then they saw conflict done wrong or unhealthy, or somebody suffer because of it. So how do you get there?
Yeah, I think it's one thing to learn healthy conflict, but then we've got to unlearn unhealthy conflict. And that's the part. My husband and I grew up in very different homes. I talk about my mom and how wonderful she was, but unfortunately, she was married to a man who was not a good husband at all. And we saw tons of conflict growing up, and all done the wrong way. Lots of, I grew up in a home that was, domestic violence. I saw all the bad things. I saw the yelling and the screaming and the literal violence and abuse. And so I saw conflict as this scary thing that when you have an argument, it's going to blow up into this big, big ordeal. My husband came from a very different household where his parents, not only did they not argue in front of him, they never had conflict at all in front of him. So he had no idea how to deal with conflict when we got married. And he thought the slightest disagreement from me was a big deal. So we had to spend a lot of time unlearning those patterns. When I would see myself behaving in a way that reminded me of what I grew up in, I had to be like, oh, nope, I'm not doing that. I had to make some promises, if you will, with myself. One of those promises, for example, was I said, my children will never have to go to school with our argument on their mind. Because I grew up like that. I'd be sitting in class and I'd be replaying the argument that I heard my parents having. And I just never wanted my kids to go through that. So I had to then put things in place. Like, if we get angry with each other, then we are going to walk away if we can't talk. Like, if I'm so volatile and I'm just yelling, then I'm going to have to walk away from you until I can calm myself down. Or my husband, he's going to have to walk away. So there has to be a boundary drawn there. Like, these are the things that we will not do, period. I will not call you names. I will not curse at you. I will not say things like you're stupid or you're a loser. I will never say those things. And we have never done that in all of our 25 years almost of marriage. We have never done that. And that's because we were both relentless in the very beginning. We are not going to continue these unhealthy patterns with our children. So I think as much as couples are learning, okay, these are healthy things that we can put in place, we've also got to be honest about like what we marinated in for 18 years in our parents' homes. And what we need to like get rid of. And a lot of that, honestly, can happen through prayer, where we say, Lord, these are the things that I'm bringing into this marriage that are not healthy. I don't want to repeat these patterns, but I need you to break these patterns or help me to break these patterns, unlearn this behavior. And then, of course, now you start feeding the right behaviors, whether that's listening to podcasts like this amazing podcast, right? Or listening to other couples who do conflict well, maybe in your church or a small group or what have you, reading books. Like, you've got to be able to feed the right things if you want to change the wrong things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and because I think a lot of times, that was our textbook growing up, what we saw in our family of origin. So what about a couple that didn't make that decision like you guys did pretty early? Maybe they're 10 years into marriage and they're listening and they're thinking, oh my gosh, we are repeating everything that we had in our family of origin. Is it too late to change?
Not at all. Not at all. I believe that any marriage is redeemable if people are willing to do the work. So there has to be a forgiveness. There has to also be repentance and renouncing. So if there is something that, for example, because I grew up with just a lot of financial issues, I saw my mom going through lots and lots of financial stuff. I began to repeat certain things like, I'm broke. When we didn't have money, I would be like, oh, I'm broke. And I had to say, wait a minute. I have to stop coming in agreement with that. That is not who I am. And so it will be the same thing for a couple who maybe they're 10 years in and they're saying things like, our parents argued or our parents got divorced. And so, we're just probably always going to have this issue. Like, there's got to be a renouncing of what we come into agreement with our words. And then understanding that just like you learned that bad behavior, you can unlearn it and you can learn something new. So we do this all the time in our work. It's so interesting when people say like, oh, I don't know if we can change. I'm like, really? Because when I was growing up, we didn't have email. We didn't have text messaging. We didn't have the internet, but we learned all of those things. Because in order for us to survive in this technology age, you have to learn those things. So in order for you to survive in your marriage, you're going to have to learn some new conflict resolution skills. It's just not an option anymore.
I love that. I think the repentance part, let's talk about that a little bit. What does repentance really mean? Because it's not just saying I'm sorry, right?
Right. Yeah. Repentance is a turning away. So if I'm going east, now I'm going west. If I'm going up, now I'm going down. So it's not just I'm sorry. It's also not just confession. Confession is just, to say the same thing, that Greek word homologeo, to say, oh, yes, I'm sorry. I did that thing wrong. That's not repentance. Repentance is when you say, you know what? I am going to change my behavior. I'm going to have a change of heart. I'm going to change my mind about how I feel about that thing. And so repentance, true repentance, is visible. There are times that I'm working with couples and one spouse who's not quite repentant, they'll say something like, oh, well, my spouse can't judge me. They don't know if I'm really repentant. And I say, oh, no, repentance is visible. You can see it.
Absolutely.
It doesn't mean that it's going to happen overnight. You're just going to be this, completely different person overnight. But you can absolutely measure if someone is repentant or not. And I think that when we mess up, and we will in marriage, it's one thing to repent to the Lord, but then you've got to also repent to your spouse because your spouse is the one in whom you've hurt. And so, that's important that we do ask for forgiveness. And it's also important that that spouse who's been hurt forgives. Yeah. And, that's hard. That's a hard thing to do. But we understand that that's not really, as a believer, it's not really an option for us not to forgive. Now, forgiveness and reconciliation are totally different. And, people will have to work that out. But forgiveness is necessary and repentance is necessary. Sometimes there's, people who are taught you just have to forgive. And forgiveness is important, but the repentance part is just as important as the forgiveness part.
Yeah, because that's where the change comes. And I honestly, I think that doesn't come without God's help. And I think when someone is truly repentant, you see that. You see God in them where there is that godly sorrow and that there is that it is visible. Like you said, I love that because it is visible. You just see a different person than you saw before.
Yes.
And it makes such a difference there. I like what you said too about renouncing. Go into that just a little bit because I think that's awesome.
Yeah. So, I believe in generational curses and blessings, like the Bible teaches those. And so there are certain things that we have to renounce. Just this morning in my prayer time, I was renouncing some things that I've believed about myself that when I read the scripture, that is not who God made me to be. And those are certain things that I've just accepted. But I'm like, wait a minute. No, no, no. Because what we believe, we will begin to speak. And then what we speak, we'll begin to behave. So a lot of couples are having issues in their marriage, and they're not realizing that because they keep speaking those things into their marriage. They keep saying things that are really counteracting the work that they're doing. So I have a couple that I'm working with, for example. I'm thinking about them right now. And the husband has struggled with anger a lot. And so every time we get together, the wife is always like, he's angry. He's an angry person. He's so angry. And so I finally had to say, okay, we have to stop coming into agreement with what he's trying to change, what he's repenting of. We got to stop coming into that. He is not angry. He struggles with angry outbursts. There's a difference there.
Absolutely.
To say he is blank, you're attaching identity to that, whatever that word is. So you are not angry. You are not addicted. You are not a loser. You are not whatever the word is that you want to fill in. So we have to begin to literally say, Lord, I renounce those identifying words that I have spoken over myself. If it is not in scripture, I don't need to speak that over myself. So I am actually an overcomer. Do I struggle with X, Y, and Z? Maybe. Yeah. That we don't deny reality. Like, I struggle with this particular thing, but I am an overcomer. I can achieve these results or these blessings or the promises of God in my life. I believe, and then you begin to speak what you believe, not what you see. And that whole faith is interwoven throughout the whole scripture. That we don't just believe in our head, but then we begin to speak out of our mouths. And I think for me, going back to, your earlier question about the divorce, once I stopped speaking it all the time, I'm going to divorce him. And, if he does this again, I'm going to divorce. Like, once I stopped saying that, then things started changing. It's just crazy how that works. And then I realized, wow, how much time did I waste by continuing to come into agreement with what I don't want, instead of coming into agreement with what I do want and what I actually do believe.
There's so much power in that. Thank you for explaining, because you explained that so well, because it's such an important thing. And to realize that, I'm not a loser. I'm not those things, those labels that we can put on ourselves or others put on us. We are that child of God. Now, am I acting like a loser and I need to change some things? Yeah. But God's going to help me do that. But it's not my identity. And I think too, when you see your spouse that way, I think it takes some of the barriers out. I think it allows us to begin to at least risk connecting with that person again.
And there's so much power, Dr. Kim, in a spouse. I remember years ago, my husband was staying out late, partying, just not being a husband, not doing what a good husband should do. And his biological father, who he didn't grow up with, was an alcoholic and kind of the party life, that whole thing. And I remember there was something that rose up in me one night when my husband came back home, and I looked him dead in his eye and I said, you are not an addict. You will not destroy your life. And I began to speak identity into him. And it was this passion that just came, and his face, he was like a deer in headlights. And I wasn't angry, but I was passionate because I was so tired of him just acquiescing into who he thought he was supposed to become. And so there might be a spouse who's thinking, well, my husband doesn't speak, or my wife doesn't speak life over themselves, or they don't believe. That's where, as husbands and wives, we get to cover one another, and we get to say, you might not believe this about yourself yet, but I believe this about you. And I'm going to start speaking life over you. I'm going to start speaking about who you are becoming and who God has purposed you to be, not what I see right here in front of my face today.
Oh yeah, and there's so much power in those words. Those words of truth. And we kind of gotten into that, I guess. But so if only one spouse is on board, which is probably the situation you're talking about, anything else that you do, what is that one spouse that is trying to make this happen? They're listening today. They say, oh yes, but their spouse just isn't there yet. What would you say to them?
It's so hard. I mean, I lived that way for so many years, and it's so frustrating, and you get weary in the battle, and you wonder, is anything that I'm doing making a difference? And, I like to use this analogy of a dance. If a couple is doing a waltz, they're doing this dance. If one spouse changes their step in the dance, the other spouse is forced to also change their step in the dance if they want to continue dancing. So can one spouse make a difference? Absolutely. Now, ideally, both spouses will be on board, but that's not always the case. So if one spouse is willing, because you make up a large part of your marriage, it's not just incumbent upon your spouse's decisions, it's also your decisions. So if you begin to pray, if you begin to seek the Lord, if you begin to work on yourself and looking at the things that I'm bringing into this relationship that might not be helpful or healthy, if you begin to make those changes, your marriage is going to change simply because you are in your marriage. And I think that so many couples, they miss that. They think, well, we've both got to be changing. Not necessarily true. If one spouse is making changes and one spouse is making strides toward a healthier relationship, then the relationship is going to be healthier. Now, it's not going to be at its healthiest until that other spouse really gets on board. But you can go from having a marriage that's like, a 2 to a marriage that's a 6 or a 7 if that one spouse is willing to give everything that they've got into helping the marriage to be all that it can be.
And there's a big difference between a 2 and a 6 or 7.
Oh, yes.
A really big difference. Yeah. I think the other thing I think happens when someone makes that choice, that God really does something in their life. And I think then it becomes, okay, this relationship with God is getting better because I'm doing more of what he wants me to do. And I think there's a joy that comes in that even though your spouse may take some time to come around, but you have strengthened your relationship with the Lord. And it's kind of like God and I are working on this. We're working on me, and we want you to come along, but I'm going to work with God. And I think at some point your spouses, they got to make a decision. You're right.
Yeah.
They've either got to get in or get out at that point.
Right. I love that you brought out, that we are working as unto the Lord and not as unto man, is what the Bible says, right? So sometimes we get in these relationships and it's like, okay, well, I'll change if they change, or I'll change if I see, and it's
we hear that all the time. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Who are you really serving at the end of the day, because the Bible says that there will be no marriage or given in marriage in heaven. So even though we say like, I love you forever, technically that relationship is going to end here on earth, when someone passes. But when we go into eternity, we'll always have that relationship with Christ.
Yeah.
And so only what you do for Christ will last. So if God has given you the burden of loving a very difficult spouse, my goodness, think about the rewards that you're going to get when you go to heaven and Jesus looks at you in your face and says, well done, good and faithful servant. I know that it was hard. I know that I didn't give you an easy load, but you remained faithful to me. You love that unloving spouse as best as you knew how. And maybe they never came around. Like that's the reality, right? We read through like the Hebrews Hall of Faith and we realize that not everybody got all the promises here on this side, but they died in faith believing. And that's, when I made that shift in my mind that, Lord, it's not only about my relationship here on earth. It's not just about if my husband fixes himself and we have this great marriage,
right?
But it's like my relationship with you, Lord, is really the most important relationship in my life. And so I'm going to do what I know to do in faith, believing that you're changing me, you're growing me, you're doing a work in me. And I really do want you to change this. Now I'm going to ask, because you said ask,
sure.
Lord. I want you to change this, but that's not my end goal. My end goal, as all of us should be, is, Lord, make me more like you. And sometimes he has to use marriage problems in order to do that.
Absolutely. And one thing that Nancy and I talk about a lot as we've sought God and he's done things in our lives, that he has never done anything in me or Nancy or our marriage that was not good for us or our marriage. I mean, he just doesn't. And so I think it's just trusting him. Okay, God, I am going to do what you want me to do because I know that's not only going to be good for me, but it's going to be good for my marriage. Now, your spouse may not embrace that right off, but it's he doesn't want your marriage to fail. He wants you, but he wants you to be who he created you to be. Hopefully that encourages their spouse to begin to take that step too. And I've seen that, more probably in women that do that. And then the husband comes along than I do the other way around. Just because I think you guys are so much better at so many things than we are in the relational part of it. You hit home runs and, we're just barely getting to first base. But God created us that way, and he knows, and he's going to bring us along.
Yeah.
Eventually. So let's talk about the spouse that is emotionally unavailable. How do you know if that is your spouse? What are the signs when that's happening?
There's usually just a disconnect. It's interesting because I think sometimes we watch these rom-coms on TV and it just seems like, the fairy tale, and we think that relationships are supposed to default to connection, but actually relationships default to disconnection if you're not intentional. So I use this analogy all the time about a canoe on a lake. If there's a canoe on a lake that's not tethered to anything, not tethered to a dock, that canoe, just with the normal winds, it doesn't have to be a tsunami or a hurricane, just with the normal winds, that canoe is going to drift and it's going to drift and it's going to drift. And that's what happens in marriage, is that if we are not tethered to something greater, i.e. the Lord, if we are not tethered in, if we're not anchored in, we are going to just through the normal storms of life, we're going to drift apart. And there are couples that are disconnected and they know it. They feel it. They're not close. There's not that, again, those deep water conversations. Most of their conversations are very shallow. They either don't spend time together or don't enjoy spending time together when they are together. A lot of times their sexual intimacy has gone away or it's, waned. All of their conversations, again, are more business-like conversations. They enjoy spending time with their friends or coworkers more than they enjoy spending time with each other. And I think that those, especially for someone who has a love language of quality time, that's extremely hard because you want to connect. You want to be close with your spouse. And a lot of times, this is why couples need to be communicating, because if you feel disconnected and then you don't do anything about it, well, then that chasm just grows bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until a couple's sitting in front of a divorce attorney usually. And then this is when they say things like, we just, quote, grew apart, or irreconcilable differences, because they didn't catch that canoe when it was first starting to drift. So one of the things that my husband and I do all the time now is if I feel that drift, because you will, I mean, you've been married for 54 years, Dr. Kim, like I'm sure there have been times that you're like, yeah, I'm feeling the drift, and I will ask my husband, like, I'll tell him, I'll say, I feel like we're drifting. Are you okay? Like, is there anything, did I do anything that you haven't told me about? Or if I feel like maybe there's something that I'm holding against him that I haven't said, I'll say, hey, we need to talk. I know you probably didn't mean this the other day, but you made a comment and it's been just replaying in my mind for the last couple of days. And I felt myself kind of shying away from you. So we're just like really honest about where we are because we've been disconnected for years. And I was like, I don't ever want to go back to that place in our marriage. So it's this relentless keeping watch over just the slightest pulling away that you have to be careful about, and then just approach it head on. Don't let that thing start to drift so that, again, 2-3 years down the road, now you're like, I don't even know how to get back to my spouse.
Yes, right. Because you've gotten so far apart. So, and you've hit on a few of them, but, the factors that lead to this emotional unavailability, because I don't think anybody on their wedding day says, well, tomorrow I'm going to start being emotionally unavailable to you. Right. And I think I love your analogy with the canoe, because I think it's really how most of it happens. It's usually not just one big blow up. It's that gradual thing. So what can you catch here? What are some factors that lead there? If we catch them here, catch them early, it'll help or make a difference.
I think especially when you start having children. Now, we got married with a child. So, I talked about that disconnection, and that's a very real thing. I love my moms, and I talk to moms groups all the time. And when I'm talking to these wonderful moms, I'm like, listen, you cannot put your child in the position of your husband. Your child is great. God bless them. He gave them to you. But that child's going to grow up one day and leave. And you're going to be stuck with that husband that you don't know and that you haven't invested any time into. Right. So on a very practical level, things like, again, I don't want to get into like the co-sleeping thing because I know that's controversial. We never had our kids sleep with us. That's what I'll say, because I wanted to protect that space. But if you do the co-sleeping thing, that's fine. But there has to be a level of where that child understands, I am not number one in mommy's life. Daddy is number one in mommy's life. So certain things, when I'm counseling premarital couples, for example, I'll say, when your child, and all kids do this, all kids want to like weasel in between their parents, like physically. They see mom and dad sitting on the couch. They want to go and like get in the middle. Well, you have to go, we love you, give them a hug, and set that kid to the side so that they know this unit right here is the most important. I think that there are so many times, because moms especially, obviously dads can do this too, but moms can get so wrapped up in their kids and, what their kids need, that they become emotionally unavailable to their husbands. A lot of times we talk about emotional unavailability like it's the husband's fault, but a lot of times it can be the wife who's just not available to her husband because she's so wrapped up in all of the things that her kids need. And then, looking at the husband, how can he become emotionally unavailable? There are times that work is all that he thinks about. He's bringing work on vacation. He's always talking about, the next thing. And, and in his mind, he's thinking, this is good. This is good for my family. It's going to help us to accomplish some financial goals or what have you. But we just have to, again, be relentless about anything that vies for our attention. And these things are always present, just like our relationship with the Lord. There are distractions galore that's going to try to pull us away from that relationship that we have with the Lord. So when we recognize them, we have to put things in place. So for example, when my husband and I are speaking to each other, we're not speaking like if we're in the same room, I'm not going to talk to him if he's scrolling on his phone. Because I need your attention. And the same thing for me. He needs my attention. If I'm having my private time with the Lord, my phone is on do not disturb because I don't want emails and text messages and things like that coming through. So there is a level of intentionality that we have to pursue if we want to fight against those distractions that are just going to naturally come and threaten our connection.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So well said. And I think, too, what I would also say to husbands, we've got to continue to pursue our wives.
Yeah.
If the kids come and she's spending time, and I get that, but if a husband's still pursuing her, then it helps her, I think, realize or put the marriage where God wants it to be. And so, the husbands don't get a pass. It's like this is a time to pursue and to come alongside and realize it's a season. They quit diapers at some point. At some point, you don't have to change diapers, Right. One of the best days of my life. And so, and that was done. But and so I think all those things can happen that kind of pull us apart, but they don't have to.
Right.
And I think we've got to realize that put God first, our spouse second, and then our kids. And I know that's hard for a lot of moms and even couples. I mean, I've seen where the couple kind of does that together, but they're not growing their marriage. Their kids are doing great. They're at every event the kids have. They're putting them in way too many things. But then when that child leaves, it's like, I can't remember your name. We parented well, but we're not married well. And I think that's not the best. Plus, you're not modeling marriage for your kids. I mean, where else are they going to see it if they don't see it with you?
Totally.
Yeah, it's so good. So what can a husband or wife do if their spouse is disengaged, they're unavailable, they're checked out? What can they do?
I think the first thing, I'm just kind of like, I'm going to approach it head on. If I see my spouse kind of checking out, I'm not going to assume the worst. I've done that in the past. I'm not going to assume the worst. There's this funny meme that was going around social media a few years ago. It was a couple and they were sitting on the couch and the husband, I'm assuming they were married, but the husband was kind of like deep in thought and the wife, you could read her thoughts and she was thinking about, he's, interested in another woman and she's going all down the list, about he's got this other woman on the side and I wonder when he's going to tell me that he no longer loves me and he wants to be with this woman. And then they show the husband's thoughts and he's like, I wonder what color motorcycle I should buy, and it's so, it's so funny. Because,
good.
Yeah. It's like, as women, a lot of times we can be like, my husband's not interested in me anymore. And we can go down this whole laundry list of things that he's not thinking about at all. I think one of the hardest things, it's still very hard for me to understand. I'm sure you've heard of the nothing box, Dr. Kim, how you men have this nothing box that exists.
Yes.
As a woman, I do not understand that. I cannot physically comprehend how you can think about nothing. And so sometimes my husband is literally, I guess, thinking about nothing, and I feel like he's disengaged from me. And so I will say, hey, are we okay? And he's like, yeah, what? Are you okay? Like, yeah, we're good. And I'm like, I just feel like you're distant. I feel like you're pulling away. And he's like, Dana, I'm good. I just was over here thinking about nothing. I still don't understand it, but I've learned I've learned how to not overreact and how to believe the best. If he truly says that, then okay. Now, if I'm noticing that this is a pattern and I go to talk to him and he pulls away, or I go to say something to him and he meets me with a shallow answer, or, you can feel those things. I think God gives us discernment. Then you just simply open the conversation and say, hey, for the last week, we haven't really been connected. I've tried to start some conversations with you that have just kind of fallen flat. And I always kind of put it on me, like, have I done anything that you need to tell me about, like that I'm unaware of? Or is there anything that you want to talk to me about that, here's your opportunity, basically. And so I think like when we address it head on and don't ignore it, we're going to have a much higher success rate in reconnecting. And then the spouse who does maybe it's nothing big. A lot of times we're like, oh, that's not that big of a deal. But if you find yourself continuing to think about it, maybe it is more of a big deal than you think it is. So just talk about it. Again, conflict isn't scary. It doesn't have to be something that, well, I don't want to bring this up because I don't want to make this into a big deal. It's not going to be a big deal if you bring it up earlier. When it becomes a big deal is when you've allowed it to fester for so long, and then you bring it up. Now you've got all the emotions and the, illustrations and all that stuff attached to it that makes it a big deal. So I think just address it head on. If you start to notice that pulling away, that distance, just ask. Asking is always better than assuming. So I would never go to my spouse and say, hey, you're distant. What's going on with you?
That's not going to work real well, is it?
That's probably not going to work.
No.
But asking a question, hey, are we okay? Like, I miss our chats at night. I miss our conversations. Are we good? Is there anything that you want to talk to me about? That's going to go over so much better than just assuming the worst.
Absolutely. And it gives him a chance to respond back in a good way. And I think if you agree ahead of time, both of you, we are going to be honest with you, and we give each other permission to ask those questions, to hit it head on. And then I think you've set up kind of a scenario to really be honest. And I think sometimes as guys, we do think of nothing, or we get distracted, and it's nothing against our wife, but sometimes I need Nancy to go, are you okay? And I'll say, yeah, I am okay. And for her to say what you just said, but I just feel like we haven't connected as much this week. And I go, oh, okay. Yeah, I can take care of that. Because sometimes I think it's when you look at each other that we really are a team working together. And when I am asking you if you feel disconnected, I'm not belittling you. I'm not saying something bad about what you're doing. Just saying, like you said, I miss you. I want those conversations. Can we get back on track? It's such a good way to do that. And I've always felt that if a couple can learn to really communicate well, which involves really listening well to each other, you're going to have a lot less conflict. Oh, yeah. A lot less conflict because you're doing life together. And then we combine that with praying together. You can be way ahead of the game. Not going to be perfect. They're still going to do something that irritates you. Right. After 54 years, I can still do things that irritate her, And if every once in a while she might do something with me, but yeah, it's just really, kind of what the decision you made at the beginning when you were pregnant of, we're going to make something out of this. We're not going to just waste this. Right. And you guys have worked hard at that for 25 years. Yes. To God be the glory. So last question. What are you loving about your marriage right now? I am loving our friendship right now. We are in a really good season of our lives right now. And I'm so thankful for it. I don't take it for granted. There's a lightness in our marriage right now. There's an ease. I think that there's definitely those times in marriage where you're going to push and you're going to have to work. And then there are those times where you get to kind of relax a little bit and you get to ease. That doesn't mean that you stop working on it, but there is a lightness that comes. And I'm just really enjoying. We're spending a lot of just
quality time together, not necessarily going out on these amazing dates, even though we do date night and all that, but just being together, texting. I always will wake up to a text from my husband. Just the lightness in our relationship. It's so sweet because, again, we were so heavy and difficult and burdened for so many years. So just the season that we're in now, watching our kids grow up. I was, telling you earlier, we've got the 2 adult kids, and it's so fun, like looking at them build their little lives and, laughing, like not taking yourself so seriously. Like you said earlier, we laugh at our kids. Like we used to get so frustrated, especially in the teenage years. And it's like, you know what? Now it's like we're a team and we can go in our room and laugh at those kids and the crazy things that they're doing sometimes, instead of getting so, stressed out over every little thing that they do. So I'm just really enjoying, the season of friendship and lightness that we have in our marriage right now.
That's awesome. So good. That's so good. This has been such a great conversation. If people want to connect with you, where's the best place for them to find you?
The best place is on my website at danasche.com. That's DANACHE.com. And I do have a free quiz that I like to give people. We're talking about connection. So it's called How Connected a Partner Are You? And so it's going to give you these results. And then it's also going to give you some quick things that you can do to build that connection gap if you actually have one in your relationship.
That's awesome. And I was playing around on the website yesterday, and I would encourage people to go there. Also, the Real Relationships Talk podcast, that people can find you on that. And so just encourage people to connect, to see what you're doing. You have so much wisdom and so many good things to share. And I appreciate that. And I appreciate you spending time with us today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kim. This has been a treat.
It has been great.